And but yeah, it's so good to see you again, David. I think we'll move ahead into our next session. In fact, I'd like to welcome David Kirsch, who is professor, I believe, of management and entrepreneurship. Do I have that part right, David?
Yes.
At the University
Yes,
of Maryland. And I was just so happy when we received the proposal from David, because one of my real hopes with the EABCC project is that we would expand the circle of institutions, types of institutions and types of programs that are interested in email archiving. And seeing that the perspective that David and his colleagues have brought from management to this issue has just been incredibly fascinating and helpful for me. Also, very, very fortunate we had the opportunity to present with and meet with David at the Association of Management meeting, which, at first glance seems like it's a little bit of an odd place to be presenting about email archiving, but in fact was quite on point with the overall themes of the conference and was a deep learning experience for me. So again, I'm just so happy to be welcoming you here, David, and giving you an opportunity to tell the email archiving community globally, really, about your project, which is EMCODIST. I believe I pronounced that correctly, but I'll turn things over to you to correct me if I'm wrong. So thanks again, David. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to see you and nice to be with everybody. And I'll also acknowledge my co-conspirator, Adam Nix from the University of Birmingham, who's also here to help me when I get lost. So I think the original title of the tool was, I think, ECONDIST, and we ended up, it turned out there was already a tool named that, so we had to retitle it. So I think the actual title now is EMCODIST, for Email Context Discovery Tool. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. I think our real focus from the start has been to try and engage, sort of understand the user perspective, and focusing on not the expert user, but sort of the digitally curious people who are doing research in organizational studies or management history, business history, who will be using email archives to inform their scholarship. And that was really our focus from the start. And we've been trying to sort of bring this new tool to this user community and figure out how people actually want to interact with these materials. So with that in mind, with that as background, I'll sort of get started. I think a lot of this will be familiar to folks. We have these born digital resources. We know they're vital for historical research. A lot of these digital collections remain inaccessible for a range of reasons, some having to do with technical access and some having to do with institutional and ethical issues around the use of these kinds of materials. And for better or for worse, many researchers certainly in history are still trained in the use of physical pre-digital sources. So we wanted to bring this user perspective to bear. And obviously, we start with this idea that we have the born digital sources are shaking things up. Chris has taught us about that, as have others. And the challenge of managing these issues around privacy at scale remain very front and center. And as Lise Gallant has said, the problem of access requires collaboration between both sides of the reading room. This idea that the archivists and the users have to somehow collaborate to understand what are the right ways to use, what are the kind of new normal, if you will, for establishing access protocols and using these materials. And users value optionality. Users will still want to interact with materials in different ways. So we can't design systems that channel them to use to interact with a resource in only one way. So these are sort of this is the milieu, the context in which our project came into being. So we sort of asked this question: how will users actually engage with these materials once we navigate the access issues? And obviously that's a big kind of stipulation there, but we're trying to, that's the question we're trying to get at. And we did a project a couple of years ago with Stephanie Decker and the National Archives in the UK on which we sort of called contextualizing email archives. And that was really just trying to take a particular email collection and putting some new search modalities on top of it, trying to figure out how we could make a closed email archive available for search and study while still, maintaining the integrity of the collection. We just heard Maria talking about the different nature of an email archive. So, we have our way of phrasing that. We talk about email as a hybrid artifact. Email is and email are. And importantly for us, we see this in the sense that there's not just content, but also context that matters, and how. So this is context in an organizational setting, in a technical format, but also context, the broader context, historical context in which communication and email are being exchanged. And we found thus far, looking at how other scholars have studied email, that often the non-historians engage with just one aspect of it. So there's lots of work in information studies and IR about frequency of interaction and network structures and eigenvector centrality and pacing and type of language, and some work on content as well, although less of that because frankly the IR community has had less access to that, or rather access to that for less time. But from our perspective, for organizational email to become a useful historical source, we need to kind of integrate both aspects, and users have to be able to explore that and experience it in some way. I'll also say, we also assume a need to accommodate increasingly diverse research questions, allow users to work iteratively through a collection. This isn't the case where you're going to submit a few call slips at the front desk of the archive and sit around and wait. We want to work with this kind of messy and tacit nature of historical research, allow for different levels of experience and expertise, and try and offer a relatively complete access to an organizational corpus. So this is, we're trying not to have to offer the user just the Swiss cheese view of a collection that's had so much taken out of it that the integrity and the ability to interpret what was actually going on in the organization as a whole is compromised. So you can think of this as sort of opt-in versus opt-out. If we need to let take a few things out, we can do that. We'd rather not have to force custodians or other rights holders to opt in. So the working hypothesis, we've been saying this for a while now, and I will explain the asterisk at the bottom momentarily. Our working hypothesis is that with a relatively complete email archive, a scholar can ask and answer most important historical questions about an organization. Now, the asterisk is in the email era, because of course, many organizations are moving away from email. I was just the other day talking to my niece who works from home in a virtual distributed organization, and I was describing this project to her. And she said, I've been working at my organization, we're a Slack organization. We're a Slack company. And she said, in the core, I've been working there for 18 months. I'd be surprised if I sent 50 emails in 18 months. So we should not assume that this is like any type of source, email is historically specified. It's historically grounded. But for the range of companies that we've been looking at, our claim is that with a relatively complete email archive, a scholar could ask and answer most important historical questions. And I'd be happy to discuss that hypothesis in the Q&A if people feel that it's if you have other ways to test it, or if you would like to challenge it. So again, we started with Talboom and Underdown's idea of their typology of users of born digital resources. There were these sort of traditional readers who wanted to access a digital resource like a traditional analog resource. There were the data users at the other extreme who were brought a large degree of technical competence and had particular analytic questions that they might wish to kind of pose to a resource. And then the digitally curious are the people we were sort of focused on, people who might want to search these large collections, but may not either know exactly how or know exactly what they're looking for as they set out to do so. So this was really the kind of the sweet spot for us in coming to the project and thinking about, well, how can we help those people? And how can we learn about those people even? That was really where we wanted to get started. So if you want to think about it in some way, there are the traditional way that we understood context was through dialogue between archivist and user. So, let's say in our case, we're looking at a turn of the millennium e-commerce companies and dot-com era companies who were, trying to commercialize new technologies arising from the general commercial spread of the internet. And so, there might be the archivist knows something, the user has some idea about what they are trying to explore, and that each brings some context to a conversation. You come to the archive and you say, well, what do you have for me? Can I look at that? Can I do some close reading? There's a kind of iterative process, and that is sort of the traditional mode of contextualization that many of us grew up with. And what we wanted to explore was a sort of a prototype of machine-led contextualization. So if we have the same sort of underlying corpus, and we want to try and understand what, let's say we're looking for, e-business trends, that's what we want to search our email archive for. We wanted to allow some degree of machine-led or machine learning enabled discovery in the corpus. So the two tools that we've been playing with, one is this EMCODIST, which is a basic sort of phrase matching tool. And then we have another more sophisticated BERT-enabled tool that looks for that allows more concept-based search in the corpus. And so, again, if you contrast it with that basic kind of keyword search that we would have done previously, the keywords just pull up the keywords. The phrase matching is a little smarter and allows us to put some of those words together into a kind of phrase-based searching. The EMCODIST Plus should find things that we didn't know we were searching for. So it might, if we look for trends in e-business, it might pull out things that we didn't actually tell it we wanted, but it learned we wanted. So again, from our perspective, we think this is naturally going to be an iterative process. We don't see the machine displacing the archivist, obviously, or the user. So there's an iterative process that has to go back and forth here, where we continue to engage in archivist and user-led contextualization, and hopefully are supported and informed by machine-led contextualization. So this is what we're trying to explore. So to the tool, the project that we're engaged in here is really trying to find out how researchers use the tool. And we're trying to review the user behavior. We have some logging of activity. I will say the project that we're engaged in is what was approved by our institutional review board. So the users, the researchers, in effect, are our research subjects from our perspective. And we've developed a short user evaluation that we ask folks who are using the tool to fill out for us. And this is not, we don't draw blood, we don't collect any DNA, but we are mindful that these are human subjects who are engaging in this process with us. And so we're kind of trying to think about the question of, how do you search when you don't know what you're searching for? And we're so used to the blank search window that we wanted to explore how people experience search when there's only, say, an email archive underneath and not all the information in the world. So to test this, we use the well-known Enron email corpus. I'm pretty sure everyone in this audience will have some experience with this corpus and understand it. I think at this point, if you search for Enron in Google, you probably get more about the Enron email than about Enron the company. I haven't tested that, but that might be my guess. And it's very nice because there's several versions of it, and you can you don't have to worry too much about the privacy and rights issues associated with it, because it was put into it was made public by the federal authorities. So the question would be sort of, where do you start? And again, if you think, oh, I'm interested in studying fraud at Enron, nobody writes an email that says I'm about to commit fraud. You have to you can't search for fraud. You have to understand what you're looking for, who do you believe was engaged in this activity? What were they? How were they describing it? How would we infer that it was fraud? So this was kind of our thinking, was Enron's actually a pretty good context in which to test some of these questions. And again, yeah, this was this empty search box question, I think, is something maybe we can have some broader conversation about, because we've been trained over the last 20 years of using search to expect that when you see a blank search window, it will, and you put whatever query you enter will be searched across, the entire, what was Google's pitch, right? Organizing the world's information. So I think we find users do bring some preconceptions to the search process, and we need to be, as archivists, I think, and system designers, think pretty carefully about how we cue people to what they actually can and can't search for. So yeah, we did some basic experiments in knowledge discovery, and Chris and Ruby came to the Academy of Management last summer when we were kind of testing this out. And we wanted to cue people so that we're trying in a way to help people understand what they might see. So even though the Enron collection is well characterized, many of the people who might come to explore the corpus don't have particular context knowledge that they would need. So we were trying to sort of cue them to certain possible searches they might do. Adam and Stephanie have written papers about their trading strategies and the kinds of gaming of the California energy crisis. Jeff Skilling was known as was one of the people who was sort of in the news. You could search for him. Searching for failure is going to be a little harder, but maybe bankruptcy. There was some exchange about that. So we wanted to just give some ideas that people could use for the sample searches that they would engage in. And here are just some initial results. So some of the questions we asked, how often have you used the Born Digital data or resources as part of your research practice? And this is just a kind of relative share. So we need to stipulate that most of these users were management professors, people who were interested in asking management questions, perhaps not history questions, but that's so be it. There's some distribution here. Many are familiar with the idea of using Born Digital data. We did not dig further into this. My hunch would be it's Factiva and more structured resources, not email archives that they've used before. We also asked, well, in what other sorts of methods would you use to study for the study of Born Digital data and resources? And again, some historical methods, some quantitative, a lot of quantitative. Again, that's probably the management audience in some respects. And then, this was quite interesting. What sort of access interface best suits your own research needs? This is really kind of nitty gritty for us. Well, how do you want these materials delivered? And, again, some people said a simple Google style search window, just, as we were discussing. Others said, oh no, I want, more advanced search and, more complex Boolean logic, et cetera. And then, a bunch of people said, just let me download it so I can process it myself. So this is, and then a few said, oh no, I want it really kind of, processed for me. So archival style catalog and finding aids. I don't want to go straight to the primary source. I want to be guided to it by the contextualization offered by the archivist, as in days of old. So, that's just to give you a sense of kind of where we are. Our with the actually running the tool turns out to demand quite a bit of computational power. So we were having some latency problems and getting the tool, especially the BERT enabled, machine learning enabled version to run over the web. So what we're doing now is building out a sort of local executable version. We have the PC version. I say done. That's maybe there should be a little asterisk there. The Mac version is coming soon, and our hope is that we'll then be able to just have people sort of download it and use it, run it locally, where it should be less computationally challenging. We're looking to engage more knowledge discovery oriented users. And I think we're also trying to draw some general lessons, which I think probably align with several of the other conversations we've been having here about sort of what is the genre of email? How do we think about email and provenance? And then we're sort of developing this idea of systematicity, that different email collections will have different characteristics with respect to their kind of systematicity and what kinds of uses we can put them to. So for instance, if it's a data dump from, a bunch of climate researchers at the University of East Anglia, we shouldn't expect that to have very comprehensive or standardized coverage. If it's a true organizational archive, maybe it will have higher coverage, but we won't know what we don't know, and we should be careful in making those kind of inferences. So I think I will stop there, and maybe we can have some conversation. Let's see. Maybe I stop sharing. We do that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David, for that. I do see that we have a couple of questions up in Q&A. And again, I would certainly encourage people to, consider raising their hand, in which case we'll unmute you and allow you to ask your question live. But the first question here, and again, I'm not sure if you can see these, but in any case, I'll read it out
yeah.
for the benefit of everyone. I'm curious how generally you see these themes being different for email that's part of manuscript collections. For example, one person's MBOX file that's part of a larger collection containing born digital materials, and how researchers interact with those kind of email collections. So I think that relates to your overall theme of your point about how you could get a relatively how a scholar could ask or answer most questions about an organization with a relatively complete archive. So that versus, how would you factor in individual email accounts?
Sure, it's a great question, and we've been talking to a number of partners in the EABCC network and elsewhere who are thinking about other kinds of less complete collections where email is just sort of an incidental piece of a larger set of manuscripts. And I think in those cases, you're not going to ask general questions about an organization or maybe even an individual based just on their own. You're going to use it as part of that larger collection. Now, I think the challenge of the blank search window is ubiquitous across the realm of knowledge discovery. Until you know what's there, you don't know what you can ask it. So I think thinking about I guess the easiest way to answer it would be that collection was acquired by an archivist for a reason. So it will include, if it includes some email, it also will include lots of other things, and that I think suggests the need for that kind of dialogue or iteration between a machine-based learning in the collection and the archivist-led contextualization for, you know, a finding aid. Who was this person? Why do we have their mailbox, but not one of the 8 billion other people on Earth? So I think that's where the kind of that dialogue takes place. We were and are primarily focused on organizations because we feel like those are data that are at risk of loss, and those are kind of they're general questions we can ask, but we need to learn how to ask them.
Right, and we have in chat here again a related question. In fact, so one of our guests, Leif Peterson, asks or says, "In my experience, it's not unusual for researchers not knowing what they'd like to access in analog archives as well. Will it not be easier to search by yourself in digital information if you have access to a collection?" I think that Lee's question here relates a little bit to your point about the possibility of the tool pointing to materials that might contain related concepts, but that were not part of your search term directly.
Exactly. So I think it's and Leif, I'm happy to kind of engage in this a little more because I think you're right. For analog archives, people do come in expecting the archivist to have extensive both domain knowledge and kind of context knowledge of the collection and be guided by the archivist. That's the magic of the reference desk. And I think if you ask me candidly, and maybe Adam might want to weigh in on this too, I think it's a bit of a fantasy that we have that, oh, if we could just search by ourselves in the whole collection, we'd find it. But we don't know what it is. And so I think that's where we hope that these tools and this kind of process will help inform the knowledge discovery process, so it's a little less frustrating. And because we don't know, I think most of us don't know what we want until we start looking. Adam, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think perhaps to bridge the two questions, I think this gets more problematic when you're looking at an organizational collection, because you don't have that single user as an anchor. So searching a variety of custodian accounts, some of which may not even be human, particularly if you're dealing with a complete collection from an organization, can mean that actually finding that salient information on your own is just hugely problematic. Certainly that's the experience I've had as a researcher and have heard from others. So I think perhaps where you do have that single user collection, you have perhaps a slightly better chance of self-discovery in a more organic way. But I think when you scale that up to a lot of different custodians around a large organization, that gets quite problematic.
Yeah, I think I remember one of the things that was very helpful for us in the first project was discovering an email attachment that included an org chart, because of course email is non-hierarchical. There's just 278 custodians split across when we found that org chart, then it's oh, this is going to help us understand who we need to look, whose email we need to look for, et cetera. So yeah, I think it's a point well taken.
Yeah, Jessica raised a related question here as well, which is, why is the way we research and analyze, research in analog archives the default, and what we would want to replicate, we need new constructs? So I guess maybe more of a question than a comment, but perhaps some food for thought there as well.
Love it. It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think I'm all in favor. Adam and I are working on some of these ideas for our summer conference season, even as we speak. So we completely agree. I think at least from my perspective, I wouldn't want to throw out the old. I think we have decades, maybe centuries of experience organizing information and anointing people with responsibility for guiding us through those through those collections. So I don't want to completely abandon that. And again, when we talk to people who are actually doing it, it's right now there's a high degree of frustration, and our hope is that the tools we're developing will, in fact, perhaps provide some of those new constructs. But I think we're not there yet. Is that fair, Adam? I don't want to put you on the hook for that, but
No, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for those of you who had the opportunity to see to hear our keynote address yesterday from Nicole, from Nikki, here you have a historian that's really working in that bridge period and wanting and needing to kind of a mix of research strategies from the old approaches, which are very much focused on the historian's contextual knowledge about relationships between people, organizations, source materials, but also tools that help expose those relationships in new and different ways. So I think, yeah, you're right, David. There's certainly a need for both types of approaches there, but also, the more new tools that can be brought in, like yours, is helpful in a variety of ways. So and then we have another comment here, which from Nathan Tallman. Our chat records, our next challenge. I would say yes, but as you mentioned, some businesses are moving away from email. Should archivists be solving those challenges now instead of waiting? Just thinking that as a community, we were slow to move on email, noting that some people in orgs have been working on it for a long time. So again, I think, yes, some incisive comments there, and just happy to hear your thoughts on that as well.
yeah, thanks, Nathan. I think, Chris, we know what your next big grant project is.
Probably not, but yeah, thanks.
And I think that's absolutely right. And I don't know if maybe people can, I see there are 178 folks in the meeting here. Maybe people can help share some projects that are working on archiving Slack channels or text messages and chats. And I mean, I know the WhatsApp records are rather important to the to the British Parliament these days. So I think we know we need more than just email, and that was why I put those. I didn't put just one asterisk. I put two asterisks on the working hypothesis that we will look back, and that I think there will have been an email era, and it will have been an important era, and one where we want to pay attention appropriately. But I think what's next, for sure. Let's get started on archiving, Slack instances and some of these other potentially even more ephemeral artifacts.
Right. Yeah, and as Jessica just commented, all of these technologies really are just containers for interpersonal communications. So, many years ago, I had toyed with the idea of, which was really more conceptual than anything technology related, an abstracted format for those type of records that might bring it all into a common bucket. But I think, yeah, just incredibly technically challenging there. Speaking of which, I see we had an interesting comment again from Leaf about whether graph database technologies have been tested to find contexts. And again, that was an area of interest for mine, nothing more than avocational or really conceptual. But I'm just curious if you've explored any of those as part of your own technology. I know there's a really a huge amount of power to those as opposed to traditional relational database technologies.
Yeah, I have not seen that used on email content. So my understanding was that most of that that the graph work was being done more on networks and on the kind of metadata. I'm trying to remember Rafaela Sandun, somebody at Harvard, I think, who had a huge econ-based study where I think they were, but I don't think they were looking at using it for content. I think they were mostly still looking at the kind of metadata.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do know there are, if not graph-based, at least relational systems that reconstruct archival networks in a graph-like way using metadata. So it's really the drawing together of those relationships after some initial machine classification has taken place. I'm thinking of things like Yale University has a project that they've just launched, providing access to materials across many repositories. So I think one final question here from Maria Benauer, who is one of our previous speakers today. And Maria says, checking in on the drawing from historical knowledge discussion, do you also cooperate or plan to cooperate with digital humanities? Apologies if I've already missed that part. I missed some of the beginning.
Yes, that's great. And Maria, thank you for your talk earlier. I really enjoyed it. I think I have some background in digital humanities. Was working initially when I came out of grad school with the Center for History and New Media at George Mason University at Roy Rosenzweig Center, I believe it's now called. And I was there when Roy was still running it. Not anyway. So I think we certainly would like to be more engaged with. I think so if there are digital humanities people out here on the webinar who would like to engage in this conversation, please reach out. We'd be very happy to collaborate and maybe host a webinar where we could get some of your user community kind of banging on the system and kind of get your experience into our kind of crassly taking our survey and telling us what the user experience is like. So we're very interested in that. I think sometimes some of the digital humanities work goes in various directions, but certainly in principle, very open to it and very eager to engage.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, David. Thank you, Adam, for really thoughtful presentation and for the for the wonderful work you're doing on the project. We look forward to hearing more from you, and just welcome you to the rest of the webinar. I hope that you have an opportunity to engage and bring some questions back from your own project to some of our other presentations over the next day and a half. So again, thank you. We're going to take another short break now, and we will reconvene with our next speaker at 11 o'clock, the top of the hour. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And thanks, everyone. And see you soon.